Welcome to the Nourished Brain Podcast, where we focus on mindfulness-based whole foods nutrition and the art of empowered eating to optimize health, mood, energy, and nutritional well-being. I'm Sarah Fajera, an integrative and functionally minded registered dietitian and owner of Mindfully Nourished Solutions. Let's get you nourished. Martha, thank you so much for joining.
You're welcome. I'm very pleased to be on your show, on your podcast.
Yes, so we are talking about all kinds of exciting stuff today. Nutrition as it relates to cognition, Alzheimer's disease risk, neurodegeneration. And Martha, you are a researcher who's been focusing in on these areas for quite some time. So would you like to share a little bit about your professional background and your interests before we really dig into the content?
Absolutely. So I'm an epidemiologist, which is the study of diseases in populations. And I did my training. I got my doctorate degree at the Harvard School of Public Health, which is where the nurses' health studies are conducted. And I had the opportunity to work with the very best nutritional epidemiologists at the Harvard School of Public Health. And when I began as an assistant professor here in Chicago, it was with a group that I was at the very beginning of starting up a very large study on the south side of Chicago that was designed to fully and comprehensively evaluate people and their lifestyle behaviors, their health conditions, and then follow them over time to track their cognitive change over time and also evaluate them for the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. So when we started this risk factor study for Alzheimer's disease to learn about what things in our lives contribute to increasing our risk, nobody at the time was looking at nutrition. And I, having come from the Harvard School of Public Health, and I have a big passion for nutrition, I took it upon myself to look to see if there was anything in the diet that might put someone at increased or decreased risk of Alzheimer's disease. And the first nutrients that I looked at were the antioxidant nutrients. And that in particular was vitamin E and vitamin C and beta carotene. And so this started me out on getting funding for and spending my time really researching all of the risk factors I could think of in the nutritional world that might impact the brain.
Mm-hmm. How did you then come to focus in even further on neurodegeneration and cognitive decline?
Well, because of our whole study objective was to look at cognitive decline and dementia, I was catapulted into that world. I'd always had a big interest in studying diseases of aging because I really enjoy older people. And it was also a fairly new area of study at the time. So it just kind of combined all of my passions, aging and older people and nutrition. And then the group I was working with was specifically focused on brain changes and dementia. Mm-hmm. So I learned from the group that I was working with.
Mm-hmm. Some of the terminology that comes up in some of this research can be a little bit confusing sometimes. Could you define for us the distinction between dementia, what you just mentioned, and Alzheimer's disease and the overlay there, as compared to cognition or cognitive decline, even as it relates to otherwise healthy people, maybe a mild cognitive decline? What are the distinctions between those?
Sure. We'll start with just the normal functioning of the brain. So there's many different types of thinking abilities to help us get through our day. We store memories, and that helps us in our day. But there's also reasoning, and then there's the speed with which we are able to take different pieces of information, process through them, and then make decisions. So in the cognitive world, they study all these different domains or different types of thinking abilities. As we age, just like with our muscles, there's a gradual decline in the normal functioning of our minds and our bodies. So then there's dementia, which is when that decline occurs at such a level that it starts to impact our ability to conduct our daily lives, where, for example, no longer able to remember appointments. We are no longer able to balance our checkbooks. We are no longer able to remember how to get to our doctor's offices when we drive, from our home, or to get back home. So dementia then is when the decline in cognitive abilities reaches a level where it starts to impact our daily functioning and our daily lives.
Mm-hmm. So there really is quite a spectrum.
Yes. Alzheimer's disease then is the most common form of dementia. Mm-hmm. And central to Alzheimer's disease is memory. It's the loss of memory, but also at least one other of these other cognitive domains. Say, for example, the speed of processing, the ability to reason. There's other kinds of dementia. One is caused by strokes and other vascular changes to the brain. So with a stroke, the dementia is likely to be very abrupt, whereas with Alzheimer's disease, it's a real gradual process.
So as you were thinking about this whole spectrum of changes, as you began to pull nutrition in, how did you come to the point where you chose the components of the study design that would later come to be known as the MIND diet? If you could tell us what that stands for, the MIND diet, when it was published, and how that started to come to be, shape up.
Yeah, that's very interesting how the MIND diet came about. I have been studying individual nutrients and individual foods and diet patterns for about 25 years. And I thought it was about time that we designed and conducted a randomized control trial. Now, what that is when you ask people to change their diets and follow a certain diet pattern, and then you randomly assign them to that diet pattern or to some other diet intervention, and you look at what happens to their brain over time. That's a very different study design than what I've been doing all my career, which is where we went into a population and we just asked them questions about their diet patterns. We didn't ask them to change anything. And as many people realize, when the people who have high quality diets, they usually take other good care of their health. They go see the doctor. They take medications that they might need. They are more socially active. They tend to exercise. So it's very difficult to pull all those lifestyle behaviors apart and then say it's just diet that's causing or preventing the disease. So that's why you need a randomized trial, because you're randomizing all those other components of their life so that the only difference in the study is the diet. So those are very expensive studies. And so you have to be very convincing that it's the right time and it's likely to have a successful result. And I felt it was time. To date, there has not been a diet intervention trial for the prevention of Alzheimer's disease. So in the process of putting that trial together, designing it, we had to decide what diet we were going to use. And I at first thought I would use one of the standard diets, the Mediterranean diet, or what's known as the DASH diet, which is a diet that was designed to lower blood pressure and prevent hypertension. And I thought, wait a minute, what am I doing? If I use one of these other diets, I'm ignoring all those years of research that identified the important nutrients in foods that are protective of the brain and contribute to brain health. So we sat down and put together the Mind Diet based on all of the research that had been done to date. Research in humans, research in animals, research in the petri dish, so to speak. We call just laboratory studies. And that's how we came up with the Mind Diet.
Yeah, so really one of a kind. Nothing had been developed before and not since, right? Quite like it.
Correct.
Yes. Tell us a little more about the critical components, so to speak, because you were settling in on what it was that just had to be included. What were those nutrients or food components that came to mind that ended up being integrated into the Mind Diet?
The name of the Mind Diet gives a clue as to the basic infrastructure. It stands for Mediterranean Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. So we did go to the Mediterranean and diets to look at, those are both very well-rounded diets that have been shown in randomized trials to be protective against cardiovascular conditions. So we went through item by item in those two diets and made a decision as to how we would modify it, whether we would not include it or, just leave it as it was. So I'll give you the first important food component.
Please.
The Mediterranean and diets are both based, or one of their recommendations is 4 or more servings of vegetables per day. That's it. They don't say what kinds of vegetables, and it's 4 or more per day. When we went to the literature on the brain, it was very clear that the level of benefit happened at 2 servings per day of vegetables. So we made 2 servings of vegetables part of the Mind Diet, 2 or more. And then we also noted that the studies that looked at types of vegetables were consistently showing that it was leafy green vegetables in particular that had the strongest relation with preventing cognitive decline and cognitive impairment. So 2 of our components of the Mind Diet, there's 15 diet components. are a serving or more per day of leafy greens and at least one other vegetable per day, as opposed to 4 or more per day that are part of Mediterranean diet. Another important food component are berries. So in the Mediterranean and DASH diets, it's 3 or more servings per day of fruits. However, none of the studies that have looked at fruits as a general category in the dementia world have found that fruits were protective. However, there is a pretty strong set of research, particularly in animals, where they have highly controlled conditions and give them berries, that have found that berries in particular are very protective of the brain. So we included berries in the MIND diet as one of the components. And so far, the research in humans indicates that at least 2 servings per week of berries was protective. So that was our minimum, 2 or more servings per week. But we don't have a recommendation for other fruits. So those are 2 food components that had very strong evidence in the research for nutrition in the brain that are distinctive of the MIND diet, leafy greens and berries. Mm-hmm. We also include olive oil. So the type of fat you consume in your diet is important for brain health. Reducing or minimizing the amount of saturated and trans fats in your diet, and then increasing the amount of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. Monounsaturated fats, a very good source is olive oil. And olive oil is also polyphenols, which there is not a lot of research yet, but it looks very promising that the polyphenols in olive oil are protective of the brain. So we include olive oil as your primary oil to use at home. And then fish is another healthy component. There's really quite a bit of research that's very consistently showing that 1 or more servings per week of seafood is protective for dementia and for cognitive decline. And these studies have been done all over the world. And we know that one of the omega-3 fatty acids, in particular DHA, that you get directly from seafood sources, is very important for neurocognitive development. DHA is not found abundantly in many parts of the body, but 3 areas of the body that have very high metabolic activity, DHA is concentrated there. And that's the brain, and then the most metabolically active areas of the brain, and the retina, and the testes. So there's a lot of energy going on and fast functioning going on in those areas of the body, and DHA is just biochemically very well suited to that kind of high metabolic activity. So there's many studies, both animal and human, showing that DHA is so important for the brain. Mm-hmm. So those are the primary components, and the rest are of the healthy components are more nutrient based, and for example, whole grains are rich in B vitamins and vitamin E and folate, which are 3 very important nutrients for brain health. So we recommend 3 whole grain servings per day. And then beans, we recommend beans. They're also very high in folate and B vitamins, and a non-fat source of protein. So the unhealthy components include saturated fats and trans fat, and so that includes fried foods and sweets and pastries that would be very high in saturated and trans fats. So replacing red meats and fried foods and cheese and butter with low-fat sources of protein and fats, like replacing beans, and chicken replacing red meats, for example. Those are also components of the MIND diet.
While you were designing the study protocol, what was the limit that you put on saturated fat intake or sugar intake, some of those components that seem to be detrimental to neurocognitive health? And what did you see once you actually went through the study protocol? What happened?
The level of fat intake was harder for us to put into food servings. So it was a very, I hate to say, arbitrary process. We didn't have precise enough data to help us, be certain that, yes, this is the level. If you go above this, you're increasing your risk. So perhaps when there was more data to drive a decision, we'll make some changes to our recommendations for that. But that was one of the squishier parts of our putting the diet together. Just how many sweets per week should you have? Just how many servings of cheese? So right now, we have a randomized trial ongoing. When we originally put the MIND diet score together, we said less than an ounce per week of cheese. And we loosened that up for our trial when we sat down to actually conduct the trial. So now we say 1 or fewer ounces of cheese per week because it's very high in saturated fat. It's become one of the number one sources of saturated fat in the American diet.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the other question you asked?
Yes. So once you had the diet protocol all compiled, you sat down and made those decisions, some of which were difficult, it sounds like, really trying to pin down these precise diet-related amounts. Gosh, not to even bring up the ratios of different fatty acids, even in oils and olive oil, right? Not just mono. My goodness. Right. But so those challenges, being in the forefront here. What happened when you ran the trial? Who were the individuals who you ended up bringing in? What was the age group? What was the population? What was your hypothesis? And then what did you see? What were the study results?
Well, before we did the trial at Rush University, where I work and do my research, so we have this 15-component score of the MIND diet. We use these very long, comprehensive diet questionnaires that people had completed, and we scored each person according to the MIND diet. And then we followed them over time to see what happened to their cognitive abilities and their rate of developing Alzheimer's disease. And we were shocked, actually, to see how well it worked. There was a 53% reduction in the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in the individuals who were in the highest 30% of scores. So those that scored the highest had this very large reduction in Alzheimer's risk. But even those people who scored in the intermediate range, they had a 35% reduction in the risk of developing Alzheimer's. And we also looked at just change in cognitive scores over time and found that there was a very strong reduction in the decline in cognitive abilities over time. The people in the top third of scores were younger on average, about 7.5 years in their cognitive abilities than people who scored lowest on the diet. Mm-hmm. So we went into the trial with this kind of information about what to expect, how the MIND diet would impact brain health. So we are not completed yet. Our trial is ongoing. We finally got funding in April of 2016. It took us 2 years from that time point to get ourselves organized, and we recruited over 600 people into the trial.
Wow.
Yes, which is quite an endeavor. But they're 65 to 84 years of age. They have a family history of dementia. They are not themselves cognitively impaired, and they scored in the bottom half of scores on the MIND diet. So they have poor diets. They are also overweight. Some are obese. And the trial is designed to test the MIND diet versus a simple calorie restriction alone. So without altering the types of foods one consumes, just reducing the calories, not a great deal, just by 250 calories per day. And they'll do this for 3 years. We have our first participants that have completed 1 year of the diet intervention. So we won't know until May or June 2021 what the results of the trial will be. But we, at 5 times over a 3-year period, we give them a large battery of cognitive tests. So we'll be tracking what happens to their cognition over time. And then for half the participants, we have taken MRI images of their brain.
Oh, wow.
So that we can look at before and after the diet, what happened to their brain. Did their brains atrophy? Was the hippocampus, which is where all of our memories are formed and where Alzheimer's disease starts, is the hippocampus preserved in people on the MIND diet versus just the mild calorie restriction?
Wow. 600 people goes to show you what a need there is, right, for this type of research. Wow.
They are so highly motivated. I'm humbled by the hard work that these participants they do for the trial, for the public. They want to know the answer to this. They realize that the eyes of the U.S. and all over the world are on this trial to see what the results are.
You were talking about
so they're very
the MIND
highly
diet
motivated
score.
and dedicated.
Thinking about a scorecard of sorts where you might be totaling the kind of adherence to a diet and assigning value to different components. Were there certain foods or nutrients that held more weight or hold more weight in the diet scorecard, things that really seem to be especially important, or is everything relatively even with its weighting?
We chose not to do that kind of analysis. We chose not to do that kind of analyses. I might change my mind at a later point. Maybe with the trial, I will look at that. The reason why is because if you can imagine, this is a comprehensive score. And if I was to go to Oregon and interview people and score them on the mind diet, and then I was maybe went to Texas and did the same thing, the people in Texas might not even consume berries, whereas the Oregon, they might have very high berry consumption. And that doesn't mean if I did my study in Texas and that item didn't pop as one of the most important, it wasn't because it wasn't an important food item. It's more that the people in that population just didn't happen to consume it.
Okay.
So that was one of the primary reasons why I didn't do an item by item comparison when I published my first findings. Because I based each food item on 20 plus years of research done all over the world. So it wasn't reliant on what was going on in just one group of people.
Yes, that makes sense. Could we talk a little bit more about those long chain omega-3 fatty acids, especially DHA? I'd love to hear more, especially about fish intake. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them about fish intake versus supplements, what your impression is from all the time you've spent with this information.
Yes. When you look at diet supplements and vitamin supplements, the fish oils, vitamin E, all of those, you're taking a human guess at what should go in that pill. And as humans, when we eat get our nutrients through foods and diet, it's not just that isolated nutrient that we're putting into our bodies. It comes with a whole array of other nutrients that we consume with it. And it's metabolized by the body in a very precise way that humans just haven't figured out yet. So sad to say, most all of the clinical trials that have looked at fish oil supplements or vitamin E or other nutrient supplements have not been successful for slowing cognitive decline or preventing dementia. So there's been a half a dozen at least randomized trials of the fish oil supplements. Not one of them have overall found a benefit for the brain. Whereas, as I mentioned, the observational studies of fish consumption and levels of DHA and EPA in the blood, the two omega-3 fatty acids, have shown significant protection against dementia and cognitive decline. We did a very interesting study in one of our rush studies where we follow people on a yearly basis. And when they're enrolled in the study, they don't have dementia, and they all agree to donate their brains when they die. So we were able to look at their seafood consumption and track their cognitive abilities over time. And then when they died, we shipped their brains to be analyzed for brain neuropathologies and also for mercury levels in the brain. And we found that the people who consumed seafood there were higher levels of mercury in the brain. Not a lot, but it was statistically significantly correlated. We found that seafood consumption was associated with slower cognitive decline and also lower amounts of the Alzheimer's pathology in the brain. And we didn't see any association between mercury levels in the brain and neuropathology. So we were very happy to see that encouraging people to eat seafood to help protect their brains as they age wouldn't put them at increased risk of developing neuropathologies from the mercury levels.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because that is a common clinical dilemma. Many people are concerned about the mercury levels in fish, so we'll choose to take a fish oil supplement instead that's been highly purified. But it sounds as if at this point the benefit is really not there at all in the same way as it would be with regular fish consumption, but the risk is worth it.
Yes. And there's many websites that you can go to get updates on what sources of seafood have the lowest amounts of mercury. It changes. It used to be that fish had higher levels of mercury, but they've improved the process so much that that's not the case anymore. So I just encourage people to go up on like the USDA website or the National Fisheries website and look for the most current data on what seafood is safe and what have higher mercury levels. But there's so many differences between food sources of nutrients and supplements. It's dose level. It's the biochemical composition, because most of the time it's not precisely the same chemical structure as in the body. There are so many interactions of nutrients that occur in a food that just can't occur in a capsule. I'll give you an example with vitamin E.
Please.
Alpha tocopherol is the vitamin E form that has been most linked to human health over decades of research. And the other tocopherol forms have been largely ignored. One of the other key forms is gamma tocopherol. And we found, so when you go to buy a vitamin E supplement for many, many years, up until just recently, it was only alpha tocopherol. And then people were taking 400 international units, 800 international units, very, very high dose levels, far above what we consume through food. The dose level in food, the recommended is 22 international units. So contrast that with 600.
Huge difference.
And then there's been some studies that where they gave people these high dose levels of supplements, say 400 international units, and then measured tocopherols in their blood, and found that the higher the dose of the alpha tocopherol that they gave people, it reduced their levels of gamma tocopherol.
Oh, wow.
And gamma tocopherol is it's an anti-inflammatory. It's got its own antioxidant properties. So when we make assumptions and try and simplify and purify one single nutrient and put it in a supplement, we don't really know what we're doing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I do encourage people to improve their diets, and there'll be exceptions. It might be that that you have some sort of condition or genetic predisposition that you're very low in a nutrient level. And, if you know that, then taking a supplement to get yourself up to an adequate level is important. They've demonstrated this with folate, which is one of the B vitamins. In one of the few well-designed clinical trials, they recruited and randomized people who were absolutely marginal in folate. Their folate status was either deficient or marginal. And they gave them a folate supplement. And over time, their homocysteine levels were lowered and their cognitive testing improved over time. So there are situations where you're deficient in a nutrient and then taking a supplement would be helpful. B12 is another example. As we age, fewer and fewer people are able to absorb B12 very well. And so taking a B12 supplement, or you can take it intravenously on a monthly basis, can really help to maintain your brain over your aging years, and help in so many ways: your mood, your ability to think, all of those things.
I've read a couple of case studies where individuals were struggling with pretty severe mental health concerns when they were B12 deficient or depleted, even to the level of schizophrenia. I've seen it's pretty wild how just a single nutrient can impact brain function, right? Structure, even in some points.
Marginal status is very common in people 50 and older. And I highly recommend to everyone in middle age, growing older, yes, to have that B12. The marginal status is very common in people 50 and older. And I highly recommend to everyone in middle age and growing older to have that checked frequently. Like when they go for their yearly exam, have your physician check your B12 status, because medications can affect how well it's absorbed. Medications are key. Alcohol can impair its absorption. Stress and worry can impair your ability to absorb B12. So it's just helpful
so lots to think about when it comes to risk factors for deficiencies.
Make sure that they
so I'm curious to hear from your standpoint, when you think about level. Gaps that are now remaining, you talked a little bit about the study that's ongoing, these 600 people that you're working with, and kind of just watching the progression of cognition with. What would you really like to see come onto the scene as far as food or nutrient-based interventions? In addition to what you've already described, what do you feel like we really need to know next in order to give people the tools to remain cognitively healthy?
Diet has been shoved to the side for a very long time when it comes to dementia and the aging brain. Having done research in this field, the first funding I got was diet has been shoved to the side for a very long time when it comes to dementia, and the aging brain. Having done research in this field, the first funding I got was in 1996. It's been a struggle. There's been resistance to believe that diet had anything to do with brain health. That has finally begun to change. And as a result, we're way behind other areas of study. A single trial should not be what we hang our hat on. I'm so grateful that we got the funding to do a large trial and follow people for 3 years. But we need to look at diet and different types of diet interventions, and in people with various conditions, people who have had a stroke, for example, in people who already have Alzheimer's disease. I get contacted all the time by Alzheimer's units, institutional care units, wanting to know if the Mind Diet would help their patients in their nursing homes or their Alzheimer's units. And the answer is we don't know. We haven't done the research to test whether a diet intervention could help to slow the progression of the disease, maybe improve their life, make them feel better on a daily basis, reduce the number of all of the correlating symptoms of Alzheimer's disease would be reduced with better diets. So I'd like to see that done. And I also think that there's a lot that we need to know about supplements. Not one of the studies conducted in the US have targeted people who are marginal in a nutrient and then supplemented them to see if it was of benefit. And we have only null trials in the US for vitamin supplements, no matter if it's dementia or any other outcome. But that one trial was designed targeting people who were deficient in nutrients. And so people are taking them and they're spending a lot of money.
It's always been frustrating for me. Sounds
so
like
far, the
similar
trials haven't shown them
on your side,
effective.
the lack of precision when it comes to those nutrients, single nutrient, supplements, especially the intervention trials where the same amount is provided to everyone. I'm just kind of waiting for the day. I'm hoping that some of the next phases that we see with cognition research or just nutrition in general is thinking about the complexity of bioindividuality, whether it be genetics and then also figuring out ways to get a firm, clear snapshot of where nutrients are landing on this range of deficient to marginal to suboptimal to excellent before a given intervention is started or initiated. Because all the time and energy, right, that goes into these studies, it really matters what your status is beforehand. Not everyone will respond the same, of course, right?
Right. Nature has designed humans to hold things in a very wide but normal range. Having too little of a nutrient can be detrimental to your functioning, as well as too much of a nutrient. And so the trials need to be very cognizant of that basic physiological principle. So by giving very high dose levels of a nutrient to somebody who already has adequate levels through food, the body is designed to expel that extra nutrient. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot that we need to use about our knowledge about nutrition to design better studies. Another area that's very interesting is the gut and the microbiota in the gut. So we have a tag-on study to our big trial that will be measuring the microbiota.
That is really
so looking
exciting.
at the diet effects
How are you
on the
measuring
microbiota,
the
and
composition
then
of the
whether
microbiome?
changes in the microbiota are the reason for any changes we see in the brain or cognitive abilities. So we're very excited about that particular study. So our participants give us a little sample of their stool on a yearly basis throughout the trial. And we then analyze the fecal tissue for looking at the complete microbiome. So this is
cannot wait to see results on that.
Quite a large
such good work. So I am rooting that you have continued
like
funding and plenty of it.
Genetics on
sending positive thoughts your way for that. This is such important stuff.
A very involved study.
So in summary, where would you direct individuals who are perhaps because of a family background or some symptoms they've started to notice crop up when it comes to cognitive ability that have been concerning to them? What do you suggest as far as resources go? Of course, we can link to your study and any related resources you'd like to share. But what can people do with this information now? Although we still have much to learn, right?
Well, I have two primary thoughts. There's such high public interest for what can we eat to help protect our brain with aging. So I do a lot of public speaking at universities mostly, but I am constantly traveling to talk about this topic of diet and the brain and protecting against dementia. So I finally put pen to paper and summarized everything that I know about dementia and diet and the brain in a book that I co-authored with my daughter, who is a chef. And so the first part of the book talks about all of the nutrients and foods and dementia in general. And the MIND diet, the Mediterranean, the DASH diet, supplements. I try to cover all of the popular areas: coconut oil, palm oil, all of that. And then the second part of the book are 80 recipes that she developed that follow the MIND diet. And it's called Diet for the Mind. So that was published almost a year ago. And so that's a one source.
Wonderful.
And then I would recommend the Alzheimer's Association. They are an excellent organization that has an answer to almost any question you might have about concerns about memory and concerns about dementia, and providing results of research to date on diet and many other areas, physical activity and exercise or cognitive training. They try and cover all of that and really tap into experts to be able to provide the best information. They also provide information on caregiving and what signs to look for if you're concerned. They have information on available trials that you might want to get involved in. So that is an excellent. Well, if you just type in Alzheimer's Association, you'll get their website.
Mm-hmm. And we can link it when I post this too on my website, if people navigate there, so they can just kind of click and get there. So yeah, 2 wonderful resources and recipes too. It doesn't get better than that.
And she's really good. If I can give a plug, she's fantastic.
Yeah, please do.
Oh.
Any closing thoughts? What would you leave us with?
For the longest time, there was really very little hope to give people who watched loved ones wrestle with Alzheimer's and dementia. It's a very painful illness for everyone involved. And in recent years, no, we don't have a drug that cures Alzheimer's. No, we don't have treatments that are all that effective. But we have made a lot of progress in identifying how we can prevent Alzheimer's disease. And wouldn't you know it, much of it boils down to living a healthy lifestyle, having exercise in your diet, a high quality diet, reducing stress, managing cardiovascular conditions, going to the doctor if you have high blood pressure, taking medications or lifestyle interventions to manage your blood pressure. Same with diabetes, managing that, cholesterol levels. So there's much that we can control in our lifestyles that can help us to age more healthfully and give us a greater chance at preventing or delaying dementia.
Mm-hmm. All comes back to basics.
It does.
With some blueberries. Maybe added, right? Wonderful. Martha, thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing, for sharing, some of the history of the Mind Diet and the important components of the Mind Diet with us tonight. We wish you all the best with your future endeavors. We can't wait to see what comes.
It was a very delightful talking to you tonight.
Thank you, Martha. Have a nice night. Take care. Sarah here, owner of Mindfully Nourished Solutions. It's my goal with this podcast to explore strategies for empowered and well-informed food and eating decisions. If this information has been supportive to you, please head over to iTunes to rate this episode and to leave a review about what was most helpful. To learn more about how food is impacting the way you feel on a day-to-day basis, head over to my website at mindfullynourishedSolutions.com for a copy of my free food mood journal. See you next time.